It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, Israel says it is preparing for a possible ground invasion of Lebanon. The Prime Minister's warning to Brits who are there is it's time to leave now. Tonight, we'll hear from one of the 10,000 British nationals believed to be in the country who says he feels let down by the Foreign Office. Also ahead, we hear from the newly knighted Post Office campaigner, Sir Alan Bates, who says they're not afraid to take legal action if compensation for victims doesn't come soon.
I know we've got the support of the nation behind us. And if we need to fundraise for a court case, we will.
Plus, the hidden crisis in the health service. 4 NHS workers take their own life each week. We ask why this isn't on the government's priority list when it comes to fixing the health service. And the British man who had an extraordinary escape after being attacked by a hippo. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. All of that to come throughout the course of the next hour. But first tonight, the head of Israel's army says they are preparing the ground for a possible land invasion of Lebanon, with fears the conflict is on the brink of a major escalation. The Prime Minister has urged British people in Lebanon to leave the country now. Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. He joins us now from Jerusalem to put this into context and tell us what stage we're at here, Alistair, because it all sounds extremely alarming.
Yeah, so I think what we heard from the IDF Chief of Staff earlier this afternoon was probably the most explicit threat yet, that Israel is planning a ground invasion of Lebanon. Now, the idea that the Israeli military has prepared for it and that the plans have been signed off and that the soldiers are on high alert, ready to move, there's nothing new in that. But Israel has spent the last, week, 7 or 8 days, bombing systematically all parts of Lebanon, virtually, and they have been taking out targets on their list, senior commanders, missile sites, Hezbollah infrastructure, you name it. Hezbollah is still firing rockets into Israel, though. They're not letting up, they're not backing down. And so, in a sense, Israel is now probably starting to run out of cards to play if it wants to continue with this phrase they use, escalate to de-escalate. Now, the last resort, if you want, is a ground invasion, because it would be a very difficult operation for the Israeli military, and they would probably suffer major casualties. You would expect Hezbollah would start firing many more rockets into Israel. And actually, it's probably what Hezbollah want, to fight Israeli forces on their own ground. So I don't think an invasion of Lebanon by the Israeli military is necessarily imminent, and I don't think it's necessarily a given, but that will require diplomacy to work, and diplomacy has repeatedly failed over recent months when it's come to Gaza. So I don't think there's any high expectations that diplomacy will work when it comes to Lebanon and Israel. That being said, Joe Biden, I think along with Emmanuel Macron, are supposedly putting together some sort of proposal for a pause in the fighting that might last days or weeks, during which point further diplomatic discussions can be had. But right now, tonight, here in northern Israel, the fighting continues. Both sides are still exchanging fire.
Thank you, Alistair Bunkle, with the latest for us from Jerusalem tonight. Well, coming up, we're going to speak to the comedian Dom Jolly. His son has just landed in Cyprus after leaving Beirut today. But first, we're going to speak to Robert Maley. He's a British national who's in the east of Lebanon. Good evening to you, Robert. You've been living in Lebanon for 7.5 years now. You say you've never seen unrest like this, yet you want to stay. Is that correct? Can you tell me why?
I've been here so long now that this is kind of my life. I've been building up a project here. I'm designing and building ecological homes with natural materials, and this is quite a new thing in Lebanon. And it just doesn't make sense to abandon everything I've created here. I've got pets. I've got my life here. And if 4 or 5 million other people in Lebanon can manage, then so can I.
Yeah. Does it concern you when the Prime Minister says, to leave now? Just looking at the advice from the Foreign Office, tensions are high and events could escalate with little warning. They are encouraging you to leave while commercial options are still available, and the British Embassy may be increasingly limited in the assistance it can provide if this escalates. Do not rely on the Foreign Office to evacuate you in an emergency. What support are you getting from the Foreign Office? Because they're putting it out in plain terms there, their advice to you and other British citizens there.
Yeah, they've been putting it out in the same terms for the last 11 months. It's a strange one because there was a register to register our presence in the country, which didn't exist before last October. And then 2 weeks ago, that register stopped. And interestingly, today, it just came back online again. I'm not sure exactly why, but yeah, it feels like the government doesn't really care all that much. I mean, I'm in a situation where I don't want to leave. I'm happy to stay. I'm happy to hibernate if I need to. Yeah, I think the bigger picture is that the UK government, along with the US, they're talking about ceasefires. They're talking about doing all they can for diplomacy, but they're still providing weapons to the IDF, who are killing tens of thousands of children and innocent civilians. And this is what's keeping Hezbollah on the border firing. Yeah, it's
Rob.
like Netanyahu is the rich bully with a powerful daddy who can act with impunity, and it's it's disgusting. I feel let down.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, they will dispute that. It's hard to separate the politics, of course, from what is going on here, and Israel will dispute that. But we just need to sort of talk about the situation that you find yourself in. And as it is, you want to stay where you are. As you said, you've made this your home for the last 7.5 years, and you want to show solidarity with the 4.5 million who call Lebanon home. Rob, thank you. Stay in touch with us as this develops. And, we want to hear that you're safe and see how you get on with all of this. Let's now bring in Dom Jolly. His son was based in Beirut and has just landed in Cyprus after leaving. He is heading back to the UK. Dom, of course, you grew up in Lebanon. It's a country you and your family know really well. First of all, what was your son doing there, and why did he heed the advice that perhaps Rob is not?
To be fair, he didn't heed the advice. He was doing an internship in Beirut over the summer. He's about to go back to his second year at university. And he was totally relaxed in Beirut. As this is the thing that I think people find very difficult to understand, but having grown up there, I kind of get it, is that Lebanon has so been battered and long battered by all sorts of people and all sorts of different countries and foes, that life does just go on as normal. And it is quite extraordinary how, despite what you're seeing on the news, how life goes on. So he was going to work every day in Beirut. He didn't feel particularly in fear because where he was staying was sort of with the family up in the Christian hills above Beirut, and a lot of the action really is happening in the south. And he was supposed to come home on Sunday, and I was completely relaxed for him to stay till Sunday. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm married to a Canadian who didn't grow up in Lebanon and obviously was watching the news and getting more and more panicked by it. So we kind of compromised in the end, and he agreed to leave tonight. He's literally just taken a plane to Cyprus. But actually, weirdly, he's just landed in Larnaca, and there's a fight in a Burger King. And he said, ironically, he's more frightened at Larnaca airport than he had been at any time in Beirut. But obviously, that's a special situation in the sense that he's not someone living in a village in the south where obviously they're being hit really badly. But I suppose the point I'm trying to put is that Beirut has so long been a victim of this kind of stuff that life does go on weirdly, normally there.
Yeah, well, and as you said, your wife just wants her son home if she can get him out of that situation, because not having grown up in something like that, because you grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War, didn't you? So, even though you were young, you sort of experienced that firsthand. It's interesting you say that your son didn't seem that didn't feel any sense of fear or anything like that on his day-to-day life in Beirut. But it's quite interesting, the Foreign Office saying, you know, tensions are high and events could escalate with little warning.
Well, to be honest, that was the thing that made me decide that he should go out, because, the Foreign Office constantly tells you. I wrote a book about 4 years ago where I walked across Lebanon for 27 days. At that stage, we were not supposed to go to Lebanon. It's constantly on the Foreign Office red list. And actually, the Foreign Office and the government has been saying not to go to Lebanon for the last year at least. So that wasn't what particularly worried me. Like, if you're on the ground, you can take your own decisions as to what's risky or not. What I was worried about is that I think there is a risk, and there's a past history of this, of Israel possibly going for the infrastructure in Lebanon. And if they attack the airport, which they've done before, then suddenly you're trapped in the country and my son has to go back to university. So actually our decision, certainly my decision, was more on a practical basis of, is he going to be able to leave the country? That's all.
Yeah, and Dom, Israel has said that, you know, its fight is not with the people of Lebanon, it's with Hezbollah. But as we know, such is the nature of the country, and such as we've seen, you know, this war develop, it is those who are innocent who get caught up in it as well. And that's a real concern, isn't it, for the people of Lebanon right now, as Rob alluded to, over 4 million of them in a relatively small country.
I mean, of course it is. I mean, the problem with both Israel and to an extent, you know, people in Lebanon, there are extremists that are carrying out a fight that most people are not interested in. Most people in Lebanon just want a normal life and want to carry on with a normal life, as they do everywhere. But there is a history. Certainly in 2006, Israel came in and targeted, you know, Lebanese infrastructure and really caused a lot of damage to power stations and airports and stuff. So, you know, who knows what's going to happen? And obviously, certainly my wife was not prepared to take the risk. So my son's back in Cyprus and I'll be off to university with, well, probably a very interesting summer internship story to tell.
Yeah,
but it's easy for him. He's got out of there. But the people I really worry about are the people still stuck in the vulnerable areas of Lebanon, particularly in the south.
Yeah, well, Dom, thank you for coming on to, you know, reflect, you know, what's going on in Lebanon and the people affected, as well as those, as you said, from other nationalities who can get out. And thank you very much indeed, Dom Jolly there, who grew up in Lebanon. His son was there on a summer internship and has made the decision to come back early. We will, of course, continue to monitor the situation in the Middle East throughout the evening here on Sky News The World with Yalda Hakeem. Follows us here at 9 o'clock. Now, dozens of people released from prison under the government's emergency prison scheme were freed, we were told today, by mistake. A Ministry of Justice source has told Sky News 37 people were released in error. Most have been brought back into custody, but 5 prisoners have not yet been returned to jail. Let's get an update on this. Our correspondent Molly Malone has been following this story. What can you tell us, Molly, at this stage?
So this is the early release scheme in place since September the 10th. It's used to free up space in overcrowded jails, and it means that people can be released after serving 40% of their sentence before they were released after serving 50% of their sentence. Now, there are certain exclusions in place, and one of those exclusions was not to release people being sentenced for breaching a restraining order. But what's happened here is that 37 people were mistakenly released, and that's happened because those people were sentenced under old versions of that legislation rather than the new version, which was on the list of exclusion list. So that's why they've been released. Now, as you say, the majority of those people have been recalled to custody. 5 are yet to be recalled, and the government say they're working with the police to make that happen as a matter of urgency. But I understand one person did go on to allegedly re-offend. That person accused of intentionally touching a woman. He was recalled to prison. Now, the government have responded in a statement tonight. They've said, we're working with the police to urgently return a very small number of offenders who were charged incorrectly and sentenced under repealed legislation to custody. They went on to say the convictions remain valid, with offenders monitored since their release and will soon be back behind bars. Now, as you might expect, the political opposition, James Cleverly, the Shadow Home Secretary, and the Liberal Democrats too have condemned the scheme, calling it this news deeply shocking. But clearly it will be most concerning and unsettling for victims.
Yeah, very much so. OK, Molly, thank you for the update on that story. Molly Malone there. Well, coverage of that story, sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview for you from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight, the Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's Deputy Comment Editor, Annabelle Denham. Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates has threatened legal action if compensation for victims of the Horizon IT scandal doesn't come soon. The 70-year-old received a knighthood today at Windsor Castle for services to justice. But speaking to Sky News afterwards, he said he hasn't heard a word from the new government over financial redress. Our business correspondent Adele Robertson sat down with Sir Alan.
Really, we're accepting this on behalf of the whole group and the suffering everyone's gone through. And if it helps me, take our battle forward, the case that we've still got to fight, then, wonderful. It's great. It's a real honour from that point of view.
What was that like for you to see Sir Alan honoured in this way?
It was a lovely confirmation of the honour, obviously, and a reaffirmation of how amazing the journey has been, really, for Alan and for myself as well.
You're a team?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, no show without punch, as they say. No. But no. It's been too many years we've been working together on all of this, and I might have been up at the front, but Suzanne's always been there supporting from behind. So it's been great.
Not leading a normal life, really.
No,
have we?
no.
It's very different to.
Especially more so now,
Yes.
Especially more so nowadays. It's being in the public eye isn't really key to what we're doing. We've still got a long road to travel. We've got to get money, and we've got to get these schemes finished by the end of March next year. They can't be allowed to drag on for years and years again, and there's no reason they can't. It's just the bureaucracy driving them into the ground again.
And on that March deadline, have you had any movement from the government on that?
No, I, since the new government's come in, I've not heard a word from them about the schemes or anything. So, we'll just drive our message forward, and with the support of the rest of the group and other MPs if need to. But, we can't let it lie. We can't let it carry on. We've got to get sorted.
Are there any other avenues you can go down if they don't, if they agree to the deadline or not, that you could pursue legally or not? I suppose the legal side is part of the problem.
Well, there are potential legal avenues we could take, but it's going to then be another year, 18 months for the group. But if we can't get these things resolved shortly, if we can't get a affirmation from them of a March 2025 deadline, then we may as well follow these other routes. And I know we've got the support of the nation behind us. And if we need to fundraise for a court case, we will.
Fundraise for a court case for legal action to get financial redress finally through?
For everyone, yeah. And it seems that it's not just our scheme that's suffering. It seems a lot of these other schemes, according to the inquiry yesterday, the findings of that. So, we've just got to keep pushing forward and taking the message out there again, and just keep driving it.
Nick Reed has stepped down from the post office, or he's going to. Do you think the post office is heading in the right direction now? Are you confident in the management?
No, never have been. It's known that I have quoted that I think post office is a dead duck, and I think it is in its current format in there. It needs major capital investment. There's a wonderful network of hard-working individuals running these post offices around the country, but it needs a fresh direction. It needs a new impetus brought into there, and serious capital. And I don't think that's something government should be involved with. I think funding should be found from outside. And as I've said before, it should be sold off for £1 to someone like Amazon, not actually Amazon, who will be able to take it on board.
Have you reflected on the fact that it was only a few years ago that Paula Venables was honoured? Does this feel a bit like history rewriting itself in the right way?
I think, as I'm taking this on behalf of all of the group, then I think we deserve it, unlike she did, and who drove the business into the ground and brought it into such disrepute.
Alan has said there that the fight is not over, so will you still be in the background there
I will
supporting?
Still, yes. We'll be having future meetings with the campaign group, the sub-postmasters, ex-sub-postmasters, and I'll be there offering tea and coffee and words of wisdom and backing him up as ever.
Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Adele joins me now. Adele asking the questions there. And little time for celebrating for Sir Alan Bates when you've got so much more campaigning still to do. He was very direct in that interview, and it was quite clear who it was aimed at.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we heard this letter that he'd sent last week to all the sub-postmasters, in which he directly accuses the government and government officials, called them flim-flam artists, of trying to slow down the compensation process or financial redress. And that's more of what he was saying today. But he said, you know, some quite startling things in that he hasn't heard from the government at all. That was one of the first things. And the second, the fact that he will be considering other avenues, possible legal action in the future, if they don't at least engage and try to bring forward financial redress for the hundreds of sub-postmasters who are
Just get a move on. They've been waiting long enough.
Yeah. I mean, and we know anecdotally from speaking to sub-postmasters that this is taking forever. If they reject that initial offer, there's a deadline of a few weeks, which turns into months, and then it's the next stage. And by the end of it, you're looking at years. And Sir Alan said as well, you know, himself, that he's hearing that sub-postmasters are just accepting these offers because they feel that they're running out of time, and they're accepting low offers which they see as too low. You know, and he's already said that he doesn't want people to give up. But he's not just criticising the GLO scheme here, which is the group litigation order, the one he's in, which is the one that the government is funding and managing. He's also criticising all of them across the board. And he referenced specifically the inquiry this week, which referred to another of the big schemes. So there's four main ones. It was criticising this survey from the YouGov, the HSS, the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, and it found that I think there was more than half said that they were dissatisfied, that it was hard to understand. Most of them said that they hadn't even heard from a compensation analyser or assessor at all. I think it was something like 78%. And so he's hearing all of these things, and what he's doing in his quite privileged position now, as Sir Alan, is using his position, he intends to use his position to continue to fight for justice and for financial redress for those.
Knights do, right? They fight. OK, Adele, thank you. Now, if you've been on social media over the last few days, have you seen this post on your feeds? Perhaps you've even posted it yourself. Let's take a look. Well, you're not alone. Hundreds of thousands of Instagram users, including celebrities and sports stars, have shared this post that is supposed to stop Meta, which is the company that owns Instagram and Facebook, from using your data to train its artificial intelligence. Except this story is a hoax, with Meta sources confirming to Sky News that it doesn't count as a valid form of objection. So how can you stop companies like Meta using your data to train its AI? Let's bring in our science and technology reporter, Mickey Carroll, because, Mickey, this has got a lot of people really concerned on social media. I've seen this posted so many times on people's stories. It's completely fake. So what can people do if they are concerned?
So Meta's just about to bring in this new AI policy. And because of all the rules that are being put in place around the world, particularly in the EU, they're being really careful about it. So in a couple of days, before they start rolling this out, Instagram and Facebook users in the UK will start getting a notification, and that will explain this new policy, which is Meta will scrape pictures and posts from people's public profiles on Facebook and Instagram and use it to train their AI. So it'll explain that part of the policy, but crucially, it will also show them how to object. And Meta confirmed to me today, they reassured me that it would take just 3 clicks to get through the form where you can object to them taking your information, and they will then honour that, and they won't be able to train their AI with it.
I did it this morning. It really is quite easy to do, but they haven't been telling people about it. So it's easy to do, but what is people's concerns about AI having access to your data that you shared publicly?
I mean, the big concern for a lot of people is that you don't know what's happening to it. So although we know what AI kind of puts out, it's a bit of a black box. No one really knows what's going into it and how it's being used. So the big concern is that if you give access to your information, you don't know how long that's going to be stored and what it's going to be used for, and whether that's going to pop up in a bad way for you in the future.
OK, Mickey, thank you. Head to your privacy settings on Instagram. It's only 3 clicks away to sort it out if you are concerned. Thank you. Still to come tonight, Philip Schofield is making his TV return as a castaway on a desert island. We're going to discuss this comeback with a PR and crisis management expert. Plus, we'll be on the red carpet with the stars at the premiere for the Joker sequel. And I'll speak to the British tourist who survived a hippo attack while on holiday in Zambia.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Philip Schofield has confirmed his return to TV more than a year since his resignation from This Morning. The 62-year-old is going to appear on Channel 5's Castaway, which sees him spend 10 days alone on an apparently deserted island. It comes after Schofield admitted to having an affair with a younger male colleague whilst at ITV. Well, let's bring in Lauren Beeching, a celebrity crisis PR specialist. Lauren, this took everyone by surprise when this was announced earlier today. What do you make of this comeback?
I'm personally not too surprised. It was inevitable. It's been 16 months now. It's been a long time given that he's going to eventually make a return back to TV. This is a very interesting way to do it, but I think actually quite a very interesting way because it's going to be very unique, it's going to be very honest, and he's going to be able to actually honestly share his side of the story.
Yeah, because from what we understand, he spends 10 days on a deserted island and there's no camera crew or anything around. He's given a number of cameras to sort of self-film, and he's, you know, there with limited resources. And, you know, we know from other reality programmes when celebrities or indeed anyone is in that kind of environment on their own, there's a lot of soul-searching, soul-bearing that goes on because you're in a very isolated environment.
Yeah.
So is that kind of the point? Philip Schofield wants people to see the real him, as it were, under pressure.
I think so. I think it's to see a more sort of... I mean, all people have seen of him was the interview he did with The Sun, and people, it's safe to say that was a bit of a disaster. It wasn't ideal. And I think with this way, it gives him a very honest way to share his side of things, humanise himself, and sort of remind people that the facts are very different to the speculation that people are speaking about online. And I think what he's done isn't good, but it's not illegal.
Yeah, that's what's been said. What he did was unwise.
Yeah.
But it wasn't illegal. Do you think it's the right timing? Do you think enough time has gone past? Because, of course, you don't want to fade into obscurity, do you? But you also want to let the dust settle a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is a good time. It's been 16 months. I think people have stopped speaking about it. I think people who are sort of more forgiving probably miss him. I think him and Holly together were both quite a home comfort to a lot of people back at home, and they'll probably be somewhat excited to see him. And I think people who aren't so forgiving will be watching just out of sheer curiosity to see what he says. I mean, there's 3 episodes, so he's managed to create 3 episodes worth of content, so it'll be quite interesting to see.
OK, all right. Well, Lauren, we await with interest the broadcast of that show. For, as you said, so many reasons. People will be interested in it for all sorts of reasons. Lauren Beeching there, Celebrity Crisis PR Specialist. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now the stars are out tonight on the red carpet in central London because it is the premiere of Joker 2. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer has been catching up with some of the stars of the show.
The first movie won 2 Oscars and made over $1 billion worldwide at the box office. The Joker returns in a sequel that sees Joaquin Phoenix back as the troubled Arthur Fleck, singing and dancing this time around, awaiting trial and with a love interest played by none other than Lady Gaga.
I loved working with Joaquin. It was never a dull day at the office. It was always super interesting. It was fun. He's very funny all the time. For as dark as the world of Joker is, we laughed a lot on set, and we were always just being as organic as possible. I think the whole experience inspired me through and through. It was so amazing to get to know this character through music, through the script, through dance, through like all this tremendous collaboration. And I loved working with Todd Phillips. Bringing his vision to life was a real honor.
Well, the movie premiered at the Venice Film Festival earlier this month to mixed reviews. We'll find out who has the last laugh, the Joker's cast or its critics, when this all singing, all dancing version comes out soon.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight, we'll speak to doctors in distress about the hidden crisis in the health service. More than 1/3 of NHS staff are suffering from burnout. Wes Streeting outlined his plans to reform the health service at the Labour Party conference earlier today, promising to take the best of the NHS to the rest of the NHS. The Health Secretary told conference he wants to use teams of top clinicians to target areas where people are most likely to be out of work because of illness. Well, his speech today focused heavily on improving services for patients. But what about the NHS crisis that isn't being talked about? According to the Office for National Statistics, 2,500 healthcare workers have died because of suicide since 2011. That's 4 healthcare workers every week. Well, I'm joined now by 2 people who know all too well about the pressures of working within the health service. Founder of Doctors in Distress, Amandeep Sidhu, he is here with me. He set up the charity after his brother, Jagdeep, who was a consultant cardiologist, took his own life in 2018. Alongside him, Emily Fullylove also joins us tonight. She suffered burnout as a doctor and left the profession and now works with Doctors in Distress. Thank you both so much for coming in. This all comes from a conversation with the comedian and former doctor Adam Kay last week, who I know works with your charity. Let's go back to the start, shall we, Amandeep? Tell me about your brother, because he is the reason why you set up this organisation to help others.
Indeed, thank you. So my older brother, Jagdeep Sidhu, was a consultant cardiologist. And like many doctors, he loved his profession. It was very much a vocation. But things really got to him, and probably from about 2016, he suffered from quite a severe burnout and probably a depression. But he hid it because doctors and nurses and healthcare workers are very good at hiding their own vulnerabilities. But things really came to a head in 2018, where he basically had just like a mini breakdown, and then very sadly took his own life in a very horrific way. And very soon after, I came to realise that suicide in the medical and healthcare professions was an issue that didn't really need to be there. And we heard a little bit about the stats that you mentioned earlier. So I felt compelled to do something about it. And I remember actually seeing his body on the day of his funeral, thinking, here is a doctor in distress, which gave me the inspiration to set up the charity to try and prevent adverse mental health in doctors and all healthcare workers.
Until your brother took his own life, like you said, you weren't aware of the statistics. And I talk about the NHS a lot with my job. One of the phrases we use most often is, how do you fix the NHS? And you look at all the broken parts of the NHS. But what struck me is that not enough focus is being put on those who prop up a broken system, the staff. And as you said, your brother is there to help people. You know, he wouldn't have thought about trying to help himself. What surprised you most about the lack of focus, lack of conversation around supporting NHS staff?
I think what really struck me was just the lack of any conversations or even acknowledgement this was an issue. A lot of healthcare workers don't have access to regular mental health support, and often the cause of their distress can be really put down to a very simple thing that we've heard about recently, is that they just don't have the right relevant tools and levels of resources to do their job. Something that really struck me, I admire about doctors, nurses and all healthcare professions is their willingness to help patients and their dedication for that. And it must be immensely frustrating not being able to do the job with the right tools and resources, with the added pressure of not having the right support to look after themselves as well.
So willing to help others at a deep personal cost. Emily, your story, you worked within the NHS and you suffered burnout, and that is a phrase we hear about more and more as part of modern life, but particularly when it comes to the NHS workforce. What brought you to breaking point within the service?
Well, yeah, back 15 years ago, I hadn't heard of the word burnout. It's only been in recent years that that's been used, but I was struggling with the expected challenges of emotional difficulties that you would come across as a doctor, but combining that with the perhaps lesser expected challenges of, as Amandeep said, not having the right resources to do the job that I really wanted to do. And for me personally as well, I knew I had a family history and a history of some anxiety. So I was quite aware of that as well, and took active measures to look after my own well-being. But I struggled to find any support in the workplace to help me through particularly challenging times.
And Emily, when we had a little chat before we came on air, you were very clear that, you know, you were one of the lucky ones in terms of you were privileged to be able to leave your job and do something else, whether that's financially or with family support. But what is key to remember here is that so many people work in the NHS because they want to help people, but also it earns them a living, it puts food on the table. And with that comes an enormous amount of pressure as well. They just can't walk away.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when I was considering leaving my medical career, which I was devastated to make that choice about, I remember thinking, I'm the only one. This must just be me. I've made a mistake. And since that time, coming across so many other people going through similar challenges, and as you say, not having the choice for whatever reason to be able to walk away from the career that they love, and then being driven to awful circumstances, being exposed to lots of the inequalities in the NHS as well, and and really having a very difficult time.
Amandeep, is it frustrating to you that this isn't talked about more? Because I think about all the conversations I've had with, whether it be health ministers, healthcare professionals, campaigners, those that work within the NHS service. There's talk about looking after the workforce in terms of workforce retention. There is also talk about staff. Well, there's more talk about patients than staff, and in order for patients to be looked after, staff need to be looked after, and there isn't a conversation about these statistics. I hadn't heard them until last week.
Yeah, I think this has very much been a taboo subject for a number of years, and it's good that progress is now being made, that at least these conversations are happening. And again, through my charity Doctors in Distress, we're trying to facilitate and make everyone aware that needs to know about these statistics and this phenomenon. But there's still a lot more to do, and you know, it's really just around making sure that the right resources and right protection is in place, which ultimately, as we've heard recently, you know, phrases such as broken, etc., which I think it's fair to say the systems and organisations are probably broken, but the staff feel broken, but they're not. They're battered and they're bruised, and I think we often hear very much through the charity that a lot of NHS staff feel as though that they've carried the NHS. But they can do so no longer. So, yes, you know, it is broken, but definitely the staff, the frontline staff are not broken. So at least now their voices are being heard, and that ties into just raising awareness of this issue.
Mental health is talked about by the government, but it's often talked about in terms of providing mental health supports to patients. Emily, does this conversation really need to focus on mental health support for doctors as well? Because I know, you know, we've covered doctor strikes here on the channel heavily, and those striking are always at pains to point out that this isn't just about pay, it's also about conditions. And within those conditions, it is them being looked after, their mental health, their well-being. Is that a conversation that needs to be talked about more by Wes Streeting? For instance, you know, party conference today, that could have got a mention in his speech, staff and mental health and being looked after in that respect.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, having gone into medicine, I again went into medicine assuming that would be the case for this very challenging role, that would be in place, but it's not. And doctors, nurses, healthcare workers need the protected time, non-judgmental space and permission to be able to talk about their experiences and ask for what they need.
Emily, you were lucky you could walk away. Amandeep, your brother felt he couldn't and took a different route out. And I just wonder, you know, people watching tonight, how you want them to think about the NHS staff that look after them. Perhaps there are families watching who have people who work within the NHS. They know they're stressed. They know they're tired when they come home. They support them as best they can. But as families, as patients, what can we do to help? I mean, we focus on what the government can do, but what can we do?
I think we all have a role to play in making sure that everyone around us, our loved ones, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, just know the value of human connection. Even just a simple "how are you?" checking in and saying "how was your day?" etc. Just reminding people that there is life outside of them, life outside of their work environment, and you know, just making sure that those connections are there to really just nurture and protect people as best as they can. Even simple thank yous of, you know, when we use the NHS, and I use the NHS for my children, and very proud and pleased that it's there. And I always make that special effort just to say thank you to the staff, because we know they're working in a very difficult work environment and doing the best that they can. And when I think about my brother, it was his dedication to his patients that ultimately kept him going for far longer than he should have. And that's something that we should really all be mindful of, is that indeed all healthcare workers are there to look after us.
And just a final word, because I know you're doing this in your brother's memory and you're doing it to help others. And earlier on this month, you had the first National Day to remember those NHS workers that took their own lives. And I know that you're having memorials at hospitals around the country for hospitals who have lost people. Again, as for people to remember and to have a focal point. Tell us a little bit about that, because you had your first day this month for that.
That's right, yeah. So last week it was the first ever annual memorial for all healthcare workers that have died by suicide, and we've, at Doctors in Distress, joined forces with NHS Practitioner Health, which is a treatment service for doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers. And it really stemmed from the backstory of Adam Kay's TV adaptation of his book, where the character died by suicide, and there was a tree planted at the filming site, which was Ealing Hospital. So we've taken that concept and worked with Adam to see if we can plant more trees around the country to, very much as we said at the start of this conversation, to let's just have an open discussion and acknowledge this is an issue that needs to be solved.
Acknowledge it's happening and remember those who have left us. Thank you so much for coming in to talk about this. I'm really pleased that you could come in because I think it is something that's not being spoken about enough. And thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you both. Thank you. Well, a Department of Health and Social Care spokesman had this for us tonight in response to our interview. They say that we are determined to address the issues doctors face, which is why we took immediate action to get a deal agreed with the resident doctors within 3 weeks. We have hit the ground running, having secured a funding increase for practices to manage rising pressures, and we will hire an extra 1,000 GPs into the NHS by the end of this year. That's the statement we have this evening. Well, if you've been impacted by anything we talked about there, you can contact the Samaritans. 116123 is their number, or you can email them, joe@samaritans.org. Still to come on the programme, I'm going to speak to the British man who had an extraordinary escape after he was attacked by a hippo. And there is a huge blow for Manchester City as the irreplaceable Rodri suffers knee ligament damage. More details on that on the way.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello, welcome back. Coming up, we'll speak to the British tourist who survived a hippo attack while holidaying in Zambia. But first, Teddy Draper has the sports news for you.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I backed Arsenal at the start of the season because I just felt as though when a team's hunting you down, eventually they get there. More often than not when they're getting closer and closer. And Arsenal, I thought today felt like a monumental defining moment in this journey that Arsenal are on of trying to get to a league title. You know, 2 seasons ago they quite simply fell apart in the last 10 games. Last season they go so close, and then you think, right, okay, they're learning, they're maturing. And some of their play, by the way, in the second half, not just the defensive play, but you know, you think of sometimes you used to admire the old Italian teams or the old sort of, if you like, teams in Europe that would be able to get through and waste time and do things that frustrated you, the life out of you, but because they were so experienced. So they demonstrated that in the second half and just didn't get over the line. So, look, you know, it's nothing to do with wanting Manchester City to not win the title or Arsenal to win the title. It's, in fact, we're effectively neutral with these two teams. But you just think today and tonight, where will we be in April and May with this game? Will we be talking about going back to that final minute and what happened with the John Stones? Or will we be thinking that City win the title by 1 point and that moment determines it? It's ridiculous because there'll be drop points and there'll be mistakes and there'll be lots of victories before the end of the season. But it is that type of situation when you're up against Pep Guardiola. He makes you feel that.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, my next guest had a miraculous escape while on holiday in Zambia. Roland Cherry was on the holiday of a lifetime. He was on safari with his wife Shirley when he was attacked by a hippo while out canoeing. The 63-year-old ended up wedged in the animal's jaws and suffered major injuries to his thigh and shoulder, as well as his abdomen. But I am very glad to say, as you can see from that picture now, that Roland is up and about back in the UK, and you can see him alongside his wife, Shirley. Roland, first of all, not many people survive a hippo attack. So glad that you did. When was the first moment you knew something was wrong?
Well, it was the sudden impact on the canoe when the hippo attacked the canoe from underneath, and the canoe reared up in the air and we were turfed out. It all happened very, very quickly.
Did you know what was happening?
Well, we'd had a safety briefing which had said that, look, in the unlikely event that a hippo attacks, they'll always go for the biggest thing in the water, and that tends to be the canoe. But the problem is, in my case, when the hippo hit the canoe, the side smashed into my right shoulder and dislocated. So as I was turfed into the water, I had a dislocated shoulder, so I couldn't swim. So Shirley, who's a very good swimmer, was able to swim for the bank, which was the safety instruction to get out of the way. I wasn't able to, and I was there really as a sitting duck in the water, and the hippo came up and grabbed me from underneath and took me down to the bottom of the river before letting me go. But yeah, so that was when it really struck home, and I thought, well, perhaps I'm going to die here tonight. So that was...
Before then, the big point of impact was an almighty bang. It was like a massive car accident. It really was. So, and then it takes you a couple of moments to process what's going on here. And the next minute you're in the water and you think, oh my goodness, what's in the water with me? I better get away from here.
Yeah, Shirley, you made it to the bank. Roland was still in the water with a hippo. What did you see when you saw your husband being attacked?
Well, my line of vision wasn't that great. So I was at the bank, so I didn't have clear sight of him, but I did look round and I couldn't see him anywhere. So I think at that point, he was literally being taken underwater by the hippo. I did actually see him surface briefly. And then I had a sense that he was thrown, but I actually had two people standing in front of me at the time. I think they were protecting me from what was going on, to be honest with you. But we heard from other members of our team, of our fellow travellers. They had very graphic descriptions of what was happening.
I mean, absolutely terrifying. I mean, Roland, in a sense, you probably knew what was going on, but I'm sure it all happened so quickly, and the hippo threw you, which is when people managed to pull you onto the bank. Talk to me about your injuries.
Well, actually, I wasn't that conscious of what was happening. I think my body become comatose because I was probably lying limp as sort of a dead weight almost in the mouth of the hippo, and when it threw me. But the next conscious thing I remember is when I was sitting in shallow water because the hippo threw me towards the bank, thank goodness. And I looked down at my thigh, which was very badly chewed up, and I could see flesh sticking out from my shorts, and I could see the blood on my left side as well. And the abdomen wound I wasn't really aware of at the time because it was all covered up by the life vest. So it was really after that I became aware of how badly injured I was.
Well, Roland, we can see the smiles on the medical staff that treated you because, you know, they don't see many people who survive a hippo attack. And I think they told you that in quite plain terms, didn't they?
They did. And it was, in particular, that was when we were being air evacuated from the airstrip in Zimbabwe. We crossed the Zambezi by that stage from Zambia into Zimbabwe. And it was actually the surgeon, the plastic surgeon, when we got to South Africa said, Mr. Sherry, you are the first. I've never met somebody who's survived a hippo attack before. I think it is more frequent than is widely understood in the media. Those hippo attacks, certainly mainly locals on the rivers in that part of Africa, and they are exceptionally dangerous.
Well, look, Roland, we're so glad you're OK, and thank you for coming on to tell us your story. Shirley, you look after him, you look after each other, and perhaps go for a more relaxing, less adventurous holiday next time around.
Yes, I think South of France is on the cards.
Thank you.
Tonight, Lebanon's health minister tells me 700 people have been killed and more than 5,000 injured since those pages exploded last week. Now, Israel says a ground invasion is possible after Hezbollah missiles targeted Tel Aviv for the first time ever.
The evidence is, the growing evidence is, that many civilians and the areas that they're living in and working in are being seriously